Hi, I'm Jim Reckert, and welcome to my series, Collaborating from Home. What I hope to do today in today's episode is offer you 5 tips and tricks for engaging adults in virtual learning. Now, before I dive into the topic, I should give you a little bit more of my background. While I am a sales engineer by trade, I've spent almost 20 years in the online training field, helping to implement online training programs around the world for enterprises, organizations, institutions. I've been quite lucky being able to do that. And interestingly, my specialization is helping people transition from face-to-face to online, which seems to be a very pertinent topic these days. So what I hope to do today is to offer you 5 tips and tricks that will help you be better prepared to do your online learning, to get higher interaction with your participants, achieve higher retention, believe it or not, in an online learning class, and to help you meet your learning objectives and get better results. So let's just dive into it. And let's talk about tip number 1, which is adapt to the medium. And this is quite critical because you're going to find that you're going to have to slightly modify your content so it will work in an online environment. Some of the materials that you have just may not fit. So make sure that you rehearse your class prior to actually getting online, and you may find that you'll have to make a couple of different changes. And you may also find that you need to explore on anticipating your learner needs. They may be slightly different in an online environment, so think that through before you do your first presentation. And keep in mind, you're going to want to allow time for discussion and reflection. As I've been saying in my previous episodes, there could be a lot of distractions around the learners. And that's why you may need to do some modifications and dive into some things a little bit more deeper, or push maybe some of the topics away, because your learners are in an environment where there's people running around, the children, the crying babies, the barking dogs, the meowing cats, and so forth. And so you may want to consider making slight little changes for the new learning environment that those learners are in. And you're definitely going to want to chunk out your content. So those long dissertations, those long half-hour, hour-long presentations don't really work very well online. At least they're not retained as well. So what you may want to consider doing is chunking up that presentation a little bit, making sure there's discussions and Q&A between those different topic areas, and you'll find that retention will be higher, or at least better, when you're chunking out your content. All right, that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is revisit understanding your learner's motivation. And by that I mean, make sure that the key takeaways are the same in an online class as they would be in an actual classroom. Just spend a few moments doing that, and make sure that the width is still the same. So with me, what's in it for me, that may be different in an online class than it is in an actual physical classroom. And you may want to consider what's relevant and applicable, especially now that we are all working from home. So consider that as you review your materials. And then make sure that you remember that the what is what you own, and they own the why, meaning that they know why they're in class. Make sure that you have a very good sense on the what as you do your presentation. Now, trick number 3 is something that you didn't have to worry so much in a physical classroom, but you definitely have to worry about it or consider it as you're online. You want to stimulate visually. And by that I mean, since half of the brain is really visually processed, what you want to think about is, how do I make sure that it is attractive to my audience who are now watching me on a screen? Such as a static slide will lose an audience in around 30 seconds. So when you're used to having that slide up for 15 minutes in your classroom, that's not going to work online. You're going to want to figure out ways to make it much more stimulating, and perhaps consider a whiteboard, consider building out your slides, a number of different techniques that are out there to make it more visually stimulating to your online audience. What I'm doing, of course, is I'm building out my presentation, but as I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, you may want to consider using a whiteboard, perhaps a whiteboard behind you, or an electronic whiteboard. A lot of different ways that you can make things stimulating in your class. All right, tip number 4, please don't do that, especially in an online class. It's already annoying enough when you're doing it in your classroom, but it becomes more evident when you're actually doing it online. So avoid that and try instead to interact, discuss, and provide exercises to your audience. And number 5, my favorite topic, making that virtual contact, using that virtual body language with your audience. So number 1, keep your virtual eye on your audience. I'm pointing at you out there. I can't tell you the number of times that learners have told me after the class, after the online session, how impressed they were that I was looking at them. And many of them didn't realize right away that their camera wasn't on. Now, I know some of the services offer the ability to have everybody's camera on. Not all of them do, but many of them do. And I'm here to tell you that you don't necessarily have to do that. Really, if you follow some of my best tips and tricks here today, they'll stay engaged. You don't need to worry about that. And then during the Q&A period, then turn on everyone's camera. But while you're delivering, you want to focus on your audience, just like you would in a physical classroom by looking at different members of you attending your class in the physical classroom. You'll want to do the same thing. Keep that virtual eye on the learners. I also like to interact every 3 to 5 minutes. That may seem a little bit excessive, but in an online class, it's good to know whether people are still keeping up with you. And so from time to time, I'll pick somebody on the attendee list and just quickly ask them a question. You'll find that you'll be able to then gauge your delivery pace much better if you have that interaction. You'll also want to exaggerate your voice inflection. And I just read off a slide, I realized, but what I'm trying to say there is that the monotone delivery really doesn't work online. So you may want to adapt your pace. If you want to emphasize something, you can do it in a couple of different ways, such as just pausing, allowing your participants a chance to reflect what they just heard. And that's one of my favorite ways, just to keep the audience engaged orally as they're listening to the presentation, as well as visually. And then if you feel more comfortable, stand up, get up. There's a lot of oxygen here in your lungs that can get out more easily if you actually stand up. Another thing that I like to do is just turn off the slides and just engage my audience that way to make a point. And because now suddenly I'm big on the screen, all of a sudden the audience is now going to pay attention to what I'm saying. So during those points of emphasis, that's a really good way to, in effect, get the audience to pay attention again. All right. And so with that, what did you learn here today? Well, hopefully you will have remembered to adapt to the medium. You may want to review your content. Number 2, you may want to review the understanding that you have of your learner's motivation, and that's really important to do when you're delivering online. Engage visually, again, that has to do with the slides and making sure the presentation is appropriate. And for that matter, use a whiteboard if you need to. Please don't do number 4. And then number 5, make that virtual contact. That actually is what makes it fun to do an online delivery. It's really going to change the way that you transfer your knowledge, but you'll find it an exciting way to teach new things to your learners out there. I want to thank you for joining me here today. Tomorrow, what I'm going to do is do a presentation on engaging virtual learners in high school and college. I'll probably do one for K through 6 at another time, but tomorrow's presentation will be strictly on that. I want to thank you for joining me here today on Collaboration from Home, and hope to see you soon. Thanks for joining me here today.